Uh-oh, did you find yourself face down in cakes, cookies, and chips? How did that happen, and what should you know so that you can prevent this from happening in the future so you don't have to destroy weeks and months of hard work? Hi, I'm Dr. Zaldivar, and I've managed to lose and maintain 35 pounds despite very severe history of dealing with binge eating and binging on these foods every once in a while. It really all started when I was 12, and finally I have overcome it, and I'm gonna share my protocol with you. Also, after teaching for decades at the University of Miami and the American College of Sports Medicine, I quit my nutrition professor job so I could reach a wider audience online. Now, without debating whether sugar addiction or food addiction is real or not, I found it very helpful to borrow the wisdom gained from addiction recovery programs to better understand the brain and to get the tools and know what to do so that those binges don't repeat themselves. In the world of addiction, when you fall flat on your face, it's called a relapse. And so let's call your binge episode a relapse. There are 3 stages of a relapse. It starts with an emotional relapse, progresses to a mental relapse, and then finally the physical relapse where you're actually using. Let's break down these stages real quick. The first stage, or emotional relapse. Emotional relapse is when you start feeling tension or stress building up in your body. It's also when you notice that you can't think clearly. It's like brain fog. There's no mental clarity about what you should be doing in that moment. Scientifically speaking, it's called an amygdala hijack. This is where blood and oxygen flows to the amygdala, one of the most ancient parts of your brain. It's in the limbic system of the brain. It's more emotional and it's not very logical. So now all of your resources, the blood and the oxygen, flows to the amygdala away from the more advanced part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, where you have the willpower and you have the ability to think rationally about what you want to be doing. This is why in addiction recovery programs, when people quote unquote surrender and they don't try to rationalize what they need to be doing in the midst of a craving for a drug, that always helps, because the surrendering part is kind of a way of recognizing the amygdala hijack phenomenon and not relying on your rational ability to think through that episode, because you really don't have a lot of blood and oxygen in that area. It's really not working. It's like almost paralyzed. And depending on how stressed you are, how much tension you have, or how much you've binged in the past, the amygdala hijack, that tension, can be more brutal for some people, especially initially as compared to others. You can train yourself out of it though, and I'll explain how. The best advice if you're going through an emotional relapse and you're feeling this tension build up is to not put too much stock into the thoughts that are going through in your brain right now, because now it's the amygdala taking over and it's paralyzing this more developed part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex. And so no matter what thoughts you get, don't believe them. It will pass in a bit. Now, usually what happens after this tension, this emotional relapse stage occurs, now you have the mental relapse. The mental relapse is characterized by the fantasy. You're fantasizing about actually getting the food, what kind of food you would get. This is the food focus. When people talk about food focus, they're talking about the mental relapse stage, right? They're thinking, can I eat this? Can I eat that? Maybe if I have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. They're just putting the menu together. They're fantasizing if they would go and ingest really yummy foods. And they're fantasizing also how it would make them feel, because they know it's going to relieve that tension. It's definitely a very unhealthy way of dealing with stressful emotions and tension. But you know that it's going to relieve that tension, and you know that those foods are going to be a very quick cure so that you can move on with your day. This is when your food focus is at a maximum. You might pull up an Uber Eats app and you might scroll there for half an hour or an hour trying to see what you could order or whether or not you should order. That's the mental relapse stage. Now, most people might not recognize that they are in a mental relapse stage, and this is why right away they go and they order and they ingest the food, and now they're in the physical relapse stage. So a good thing to do in that interim, now that you understand that this is a mental relapse stage, is to follow up those food thoughts, those fantasies you're having, follow them up right away with the reason why it's not in your best interest to ingest those foods. What would happen to your skin? What would happen to your waistline? What would happen to your energy levels and productivity for the rest of the day if you cave in and you ingest all of those carby foods? It's very difficult to stop those food thoughts from appearing in your brain, but you can totally attach the negative consequences to consuming those foods with every food thought. And over time, you train your brain to not only remember how great they taste, but also how horrible they are for your life. It's also helpful to know that the intensity and the frequency of mental relapses tend to be at their highest in the first 2 weeks of following a healthier diet. So in the first 2 weeks of eliminating sugar and carbs and addictive foods and very yummy foods, this is when most people struggle the most. But if you know that it's going to get easier, it's very helpful to wait it out, ride those cravings, ride the mental relapses that occur, and attach the negative consequences to those food thoughts and allow your brain to regulate its dopamine and neurotransmitters so that in the future you don't go through that with the same intensity or frequency. It really does get much easier over time. If you want to feel the best amount of food freedom and the least amount of cravings or mental relapses, then 90 days of not eating anything that can trigger the brain in that way, anything addictive or very yummy, it takes really 90 days. And so also having that other milestone in your mind can be very helpful to write it out and just know that over time it keeps getting easier and easier and easier. Another major hack is raising your baseline dopamine. If you raise your baseline dopamine, you can reduce the intensity and the frequency of your cravings by 70%. So you won't have those urges, those uncontrollable urges to seek out those foods. This is based on my 7 years of research that I did at the University of Miami, where I studied exactly how to raise baseline dopamine levels to target chocolate and sugar addiction. It's like you have to go through a brain rehab protocol to raise your baseline dopamine. I've put together the method to do that in my fitness bundle, which includes the dopamine brain guide, which targets the physiological aspect of raising your baseline dopamine. And it also includes the monster mindset guide, which tackles the mental aspect of how you can raise baseline dopamine that way. You really need both the physical and the mental aspects to raise baseline dopamine as effectively and as quickly as possible so that you don't have those urges, those cravings, those mental relapses that can be very distressing. You can find the fitness bundle on my website at DrZALDIVAR.com/shop. Now, if you allow the mental relapse to go on and you cave in, now we have a physical relapse where you've actually went out and consumed that food. At this point, usually it's very difficult to stop midway. So if you're binging or if you've binged in the past, you probably know that it's very difficult to stop in the middle of a binge. For some people, they can stay stuck in this physical relapse for months. I remember I would track all of my food, and I remember one time when the binging was at its worst, I spent 13 days of just eating whatever. It was like a full-blown physical relapse, and I did not know how to get myself out of it. Over time, as I raised my baseline dopamine and I understood how my brain worked better and better, the binges would last 3 days in a row, then it was 2 days, then it was just one meal, and I could get back up again until you lead to extinction and you no longer have any binges. I would also add that something that really helped me was speeding up my metabolism via a process called reverse dieting. Because if you have slowed down your metabolism from bouts of dieting and you never corrected that slowdown in your metabolism, because your metabolism doesn't just speed up back up again the moment you go back and you regain the weight and you stop the diet. You actually have to go through a reverse dieting phase in order to speed up the metabolism so that also you increase baseline dopamine. Slow metabolism is associated with a low baseline dopamine level and vice versa. And so you also want to speed up your metabolism, especially if you come from a long history of dieting without correcting that dieting after effects. I explain how I did that in my guide, SUPERBREED METABOLISM. It's also on my website at DrZALDIVAR.com/shop. And sometimes you just have to let that physical relapse cycle kind of take its course until you find a little opening on one day, on one morning, on some evening where you decide that that's it, you're gonna stop. And that is when you really want to take advantage, jump at the opportunity of that little motivation that you've got to get back on track. And now you can go back and be food sober from a smarter place, because now you have more experience dealing with emotional relapse and then the mental relapse and finally the physical relapse. So now you can be aware of what is going on, and you can develop tools to stop those things from happening and to stop anything that could trigger the sequence of events. And the single most important thing that you can do is join a support group, especially in the initial stages of changing your habits. Because in the initial stages of changing your habits and your diet, this is really where you're most vulnerable to going down that path of the relapses, and you still don't have the tools to know what to do to stop it in its track. I offer group coaching that starts at the beginning of every month, month. And so we're starting a new one at the beginning of May. The current schedule is every Thursday at 2 p.m. and every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern. You can sign up on my website at DrZALDIVAR.com/group coaching. And personally, the carnivore diet was the diet that helped me the most in this area. And so if you're interested in learning more about it, I will send you a free copy of my guide, the 30-Day Carnivore Diet Challenge Guide, when you sign up to my newsletter at DrZALDIVAR.com/newsletter. And if you found this information helpful, please share it with a loved one who you think might benefit from this type of awareness. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.